Hello there. I like cold brew, and I'd be willing to bet if you clicked on this video, you probably like cold brew at least a little bit too. So let me show you how to make this. Now, I'm gonna keep things pretty simple today because while I do love cold brewers like this one right here, you can do this with things as simple as a cloth coffee filter and also a mason jar, although yours does not have to be this big. Now, we know that hot water is pretty dang good at extracting coffee pretty dang quickly, usually within a couple of minutes. However, it's in the name. Today we're gonna be using cold water, which dictates that our extraction is gonna take a little bit longer. Well, a lot longer. Now, the other thing we're gonna do is grind our beans a good deal coarser than we would for pour over. It's gonna make it easier to filter them out after the brew and also give us that round, low acidity flavor that cold brew is known for. Okay, enough chit chat. Let me grab our ground coffee and I'll be right back.
I want to give a huge thank you to Trade for sponsoring today's video. Speaking of cold brew, if you're lost on what coffee to use when brewing, fear no more. Because this summer, Trade is making it incredibly easy by teaming up with 15 roasters around the US to source and curate a special cold brew collection with each coffee specifically selected for cold extraction. Every bag is roasted to order and delivered to your front door on the schedule that works best for you. Additionally, Trade also curates the equipment you'll need, creating a one-stop shop for all your cold coffee needs. But if you're not into cold brewing, they've also got their incredible lineup of curated coffees for every brewing style and roast profile. Anyways, if you've been around this channel for a while, you've probably seen this Hario cold brewer before, and I'm super excited to share that for a limited time, Trade is giving away a free Hario cold brewer when you sign up for a cold brew subscription at drinktrade.com/MDC. That's the top link in the description, or drinktrade.com/MDC to get your free cold brew maker with select cold brew subscriptions.
Now, all in all, cold brew is a pretty easy thing to make, and it is super versatile, especially in the summer. So let's run through everything we'll be using today. First things first, and most importantly, the coffee. Now, as I mentioned before, this is pretty coarsely ground coffee. If you are used to brewing French press, that's around the grind size we're looking for here. If you frequently brew pour overs or filter coffees, definitely crank it a few numbers coarser. Now, love it or hate it, cold brew has a pretty distinct flavor profile due to the fact that we are brewing low and slow. Pretty much no matter what, we're gonna get a pretty round, low acidity brew at the end of this. However, just because there is a common flavor trait throughout cold brewing methods doesn't mean that you shouldn't pay attention to the coffee. Today, I'm using a medium roast natural Ethiopian coffee, so it's got a lot of really nice, like kind of fun fruit forward notes to it, and that's gonna translate into a really delicious cold brew. Of course, you can always go the more traditional chocolatey route, but I like to have fun with the coffee in my cold brew. Next up, we are brewing coffee, which is around 98% water, so inevitably, we will need some water. You saw me futzing with it earlier, and that's because I was adding minerals to distilled water to make some nice brewing water. My general rule of thumb is that if you have fairly soft water that is just pretty pleasant to drink straight off the tap, you probably don't need to think too hard about your water. You're probably totally fine to brew with it and it'll taste really nice. However, if you have particularly hard water, that can pretty drastically impact the final flavor of your coffee, so it might be worth investing in some minerals and some distilled water. I'll link some of my favorites down below. Now, as far as our actual brewing device goes, you will need some sort of filtration bag. This is a cloth one right here. There's lots of brands you can purchase. You can also go with a paper bag like in the Toddy system, but you'll just want something that you can close up once you add your ground coffee. Additionally, you will need some sort of large jar or carafe, and trust me, you do not need to find the world's largest mason jar like I have. The recipe we're going to be using is in ratios, so you can scale it up or down no matter what vessel you're using. We will also need a spoon of some type. This happens to be a coffee agitation stick, which is a very fancy word for very skinny spoon. A regular spoon will work just fine. Now, with our tools out of the way, let's move on to our recipe. Today, we are going to be brewing a cold brew concentrate that you can then dilute out to whatever strength you prefer. This is the way I make cold brew pretty much all the time, and this is the most popular way that cafes are going to make cold brew. And the reasons for me are kind of twofold. Number one, brewing a concentrate yields more final cold brew in the same amount of time than if you brewed a larger ratio that resulted directly in a ready-to-drink version. This is kind of the primary reason that cafes do this. It's a lot more efficient with a higher yield at the end. Additionally, the resulting concentrate liquid, while it might be pretty harsh to drink on its own, it acts as a pretty decent substitute for something like a chilled espresso. It's very highly concentrated in flavor and can punch through milk super well. Additionally, if you're someone like me that likes to make a lot of signature coffee drinks, I use concentrate quite a bit, and so it's nice to have on hand. Now, the ratio we're going to be using today, and the one I want you to keep in mind as you scale this up or down depending on your vessel, if it's not a monstrous mason jar, is a 1:8 ratio. This means that for every 1 part of coffee, you're going to have 8 parts of water. If that's a little complicated to think about, I'll make it a little bit simpler. First thing you're going to do is decide the volume of coffee you're going to brew. So I'm using this this frankly ridiculous mason jar. I'm going to brew about 3 liters of concentrate. This is going to be about 3,000 milliliters, which I'm then going to divide by 8. By dividing that number of 3,000 by 8, it's going to give me the weight of coffee I need for this brew. In this case, it's 375. So I'm using 375 grams of ground coffee. First things first, let's get our ground coffee into our coffee filter. Nice thing about these are that they are reusable and last for a good long while. Now, what's nice about these filter bags is that they typically will have some sort of little string that you can cinch off the top. So we're going to put the edges of our bag around the top of our jar. We're going to tighten it. Basically, for this moment, we just want to make sure that our bag isn't going to accidentally fall into the jar. Now, cold brewing is a method that is also full immersion. This means that all of those granules of coffee are going to be in contact with water for the duration of the brew. And we have a lot of coffee in here. In fact, it is packed into a relatively small filter comparatively to the entire size of the brewing device. So it's super important that we make sure that all of that coffee is saturated before we seal it up and start the brewing. So to do that, I'm gonna add about 2 times the weight of my coffee in water first. If you were doing this with hot water, this would be kind of the bloom section of it. I'm not doing this to bloom the coffee. I'm instead going to be adding the water and then using my spoon or my agitation stick to stir everything and make sure there aren't any dry pockets or any compacted coffee in the filter. As you do this, even if you have cinched your bag around the top of the jar, I do recommend holding onto it with one hand. I have had multiple instances, especially at a cafe scale, which is a lot of cold brew, where the filter has collapsed in and all of those grounds escape out of the filter. And it is not fun, let me tell you that. I'm not scraping, I'm just gently agitating, moving the stick around, making sure to kind of break up any dry clumps of coffee that has compacted as that water slowly moves through and starts to reach the bottom. Once you feel that everything in there is fully saturated, you simply add the rest of your water. And then seal up your brew device. All that's left is for time to work its magic and for that coffee to slowly extract. Now, I typically let a cold brew concentrate brew for about 12 to 16 hours. At 12 hours, I will start tasting. If it's not to my liking, I'll let it go to the full 16, but 12 to 16 is typically my range for this recipe. If you prefer, you can definitely put this in the fridge and let it brew at a cooler temperature. However, I've always found marginally better flavor results from letting it brew at room temperature. So put this on your counter, keep it out of the sun, just somewhere like nice and cool and shaded. Give it between 12 to 16 hours, and then we'll be back. Now, I thankfully already have a finished concentrate, so I'll be back in like 2 minutes. Okay, and this is my concentrate, baby. This has been going for about 12 hours. Let me taste. Now, concentrate is not something that I typically drink on its own. However, even though the flavor intensity is too strong, I can still taste that we have some really nice round, slightly fruity flavors happening in here, which means it's probably gonna taste pretty dang good once we get it diluted. Now the last step is simply to remove your filter bag of grounds. Thankfully this is super easy if you're using a nice sturdy bag. We're just gonna give it some nice gentle squeezes and let the last bits of that concentrate drain out. And finally, after all of our hard work, we have achieved the thing that we most desire, which is a giant mason jar full of brown liquid. Now, typically I would transfer this to some sort of pitcher that I could then pour it out of, but I'm excited to have some coffee, so I'm just gonna pour it out of this. The beauty of this is you can really adjust this to your own personal taste. Remember, this is a 1:8 ratio concentrate, so typically I will dilute this with equal parts water. But just trust your taste buds. Oh gosh, this is why I transfer it. That's pretty nice. You can always add a little bit of cream if you like. Something I'll occasionally do with a nice chocolatey cold brew. Or, as I mentioned before, you can even make a nice little pseudo iced latte. Glass full of milk of your choice, about 2 ounces of our concentrate on top. All in all, if you don't have an espresso machine, that's pretty tasty. So this has been how I make cold brew and how you might make it as well. I will link further fun cold brew recipes down in the description if you want to have fun with some cold brew signature beverages beyond just the simple drinks we made today. Again, another huge thank you to Trade for sponsoring today's video. They will be the top link in the description if you are looking for really tasty coffees for cold brew specifically. Otherwise, I think I'm gonna head out of here. This was fun. I will see you all next time. I hope you have a good day. Goodbye, everyone.